I got washed up. My marriage was a catastrophe. I was one mistake away from losing my position at the plant. I was drinking myself unconscious to forget about my difficulties and waking up suffocated with fresh regrets. I was hanging on a thread. One November morning, the thread was severed. I had passed out on the sofa at home after starting drinking on Friday evening as soon as work ended. I remember the first bar I went to and how amazing my first drink tasted. A clean dose of rye sparked a fire in my belly. I felt great, so I ordered another. After that, nothing happened until my eyes opened and the agony struck me in the face. I grumbled. Hangovers teach us that drinking is a bad decision. I had never been very interested in learning, but at the time, I was eager to accept the truth that I had made a mistake. I would have done anything to avoid feeling like that again. I would have gotten on the wagon. I'd have begun eating healthier foods. I would have even joined a gym. Maybe I would have. Perhaps it was a time when my life could have turned around. Only while I lay there, reeling from the pain in my brain that had traveled to my stomach, did I realize someone was standing over me. When I attempted to focus, the fuzzy figures rearranged themselves to form the love of my life. Mary Lynn had never been crowned homecoming queen, but she had stolen my breath away the first time I saw her. She had been kicking the tire of her automobile because it was flat. Once I had the oxygen flowing steadily back into my lungs, I gallantly went over and adjusted it for her. We were married 12 months later. She was 19 and I was 20, which was way too young. I was 29 going on 60. That morning, when I stared up at her, I readied myself, expecting Mom to start shouting at me since that had been our primary mode of communication for some time. Then I noticed tears streaming over her makeup. "What is it?" I managed to speak and attempted to sit up. The agony directed its focus to a location directly behind my eyes. I shed a tear and blinked. "Look here," she replied, pointing to the television. The screen displayed the interior of a severely wrecked business. The contents of its shelves were spread on the floor, and broken glass lay scattered in puddles of murky liquid. A strip lamp hung down, barely linked to the ceiling by a stray cable, and the front window was broken. A jagged-edged hole had developed in the center. Then, a newsreader's monotone voice informed the audience that the stunned owner was faced with this image when he went to open his family company at 5 a.m. Police would like to speak to this man who was captured on the shop CCTV. A blurry vision appeared. A guy, unshaven and wild-eyed, standing among the ruins. That was me. I gazed at Mary Lynn. "I don't remember," I said. She turned away. "Get out," she said, "and don't come back." If I'd been more assertive, I'd have gone to the police station and handed myself in. I would have accepted the consequences of my evil, intoxicated behavior. But when I staggered out into the street, all I could think of was my revulsion and terror. I had lost my wife. I'd lose my job. The possibility of incarceration horrified me. I needed to get away before someone spotted me on the news and gave the cops my identity. That's all I could think of. I went to the coach station and purchased a ticket that would transport me away from all I had ever known. It took 5 days to get to the last stop on the line, after which I began hitchhiking. The drivers enjoyed talking. One man, who smelled worse than I did after a week in the same clothing, informed me he knew a company that was recruiting. If I was looking for work, it's a no-questions-asked type of place, he admitted to me. He smoked constantly while driving and had his window rolled down to let the ash out. When I responded, I shivered and my teeth chattered. "This sounds like my sort of place. How much further is it?" "Well," he replied, pausing to light another cigarette, "you should keep driving north until you reach the Arctic Circle and then keep going. Beyond a town that old-timers like me still name Barrow, there are no signs for the spot I'm talking about, but it's as excellent a hiding place as any for a guy fleeing." After saying this, He turned and offered me a wink. I shuddered again, but not because of the cold. I hadn't told this man or anybody else about what had transpired. I think it simply showed on my face. He dropped me at a crossroads. A petrol station, a diner, and a hotel gathered together along the road as if they were attempting to stay warm in the cold. By this point, the harsh temperature had gone into my bones, and I wasn't sure I'd ever feel warm again. I booked into a hotel. It was just early afternoon, yet the sunshine was already fading. As I drove farther north, the days became shorter. That day had passed quickly, and darkness hid the landscape as I stood peering out the hotel room window. When I registered under a fake identity and paid with almost all of my cash, I told the motel clerk I wanted to go to a business north of Barrow that was hiring. He stared at me with hatred and despair, but said nothing. I was about to go to the diner for my last meal due to financial difficulties when the clerk suggested I look for someone who works there. A guy with his feet on the ground would have heard alarms at that point. I thanked him and walked over to the diner. The brightness and warmth I felt inside were terrific, and the aroma of coffee was a lifeline. Most of the tables were unoccupied, but I walked over to one that was already taken. Characterizing someone as a huge fellow up here was akin to describing a biker as the guy with the leather jacket, but I was sure I had met my man. He must have been around 7 feet tall. His face reflected years of hard work. He shaved his skull and tattooed a single scarlet tear beneath his left eye. "Do you mind if I join you?" I asked. He nodded and resumed eating his food. I told him directly what I wanted. After finishing his meal, he commented, "You have the look of a man looking for a place to stay while trouble passes." This made me pledge not to play poker with anyone for a long time. A few minutes alone was certainly enough time to read me. "So, I won't try to dissuade you," the vast guy said. "I am the warehouse's foreman. If you desire a job, I will give you a chance. You want to ride out with me?" Mighty grateful, I responded, following him out to his pickup. He moved with effortless elegance, belying his stature, and didn't appear to mind the cold. A few minutes in the wind, which had picked up while we were in the diner, was enough to make me physically ill. My hands trembled so much as I attempted to fasten my seat belt that I gave up. The considerable fellow grinned as he saw this. An antique fur-lined cloak may be found in the warehouse office. If it hasn't gotten up and walked out because of all the fleas, you can borrow it. I grinned. I was so chilly that my facial muscles locked up, resulting in a grimace. The large guy remained smiling and started the engine. We drove through the dark. There was a brief period of daylight, but the area it showed was devoid of characteristics, a bleak, snow-covered landscape. When the darkness returned, the vast gentleman set the headlights on full beam. After many hours, lights appeared in the distance. As we got closer, I saw they were coming from a building. The lights stretched eternally, embedded in the earth and extending the whole length of the skyscraper as far as I could see. This setting lacked coziness and warmth. We came to a rattling stop in front of the building, and the big fellow turned to me with a curt, "Follow me." Reluctantly, I left the truck's relative warmth. The previous breeze had gone down, leaving a mesmerizing silence. The air was frigid and cutting into my flesh. There was no time to linger. I raced after the large gentleman as quickly as I could. He was entering a number onto a keypad near the entrance, and I had no intention of being left outside. The door opened with a mechanical click, and he indicated for me to enter before shutting it behind us. Inside, we entered a well-lit, open expanse that spanned roughly 3/4 of the building's length. There were stacks of containers all over the place, but no one else was present. Our footsteps resonated in the great expanse as I kept up with him. At the end, we encountered a dividing wall, another keypad, another code. Beyond the door stood a thin corridor lined with small rooms. "That's my office," the vast guy remarked, pointing to one of the doors. Through the glass, I noticed a desk filled with files, books, and drawers, but no laptop or electrical equipment. A whiteboard hung on the wall, covered in hand-drawn columns of text. I was inclined to inquire what type of operation this was, but stopped myself, knowing the warning I'd received. It's a no-questions-asked sort of environment. True to tradition, the vast gentleman had not inquired for my name, social security number, or any other niceties. I felt if I wanted to stay, I should return the favor. Still, my mind raced with supposition. Was this a drug hub? Weapons? Perhaps illicit chemicals? Whatever it was, the distant location prevented prying eyes. The structure itself appeared abandoned for the winter, as if waiting for spring to bring its secret network back to life. The large man brought me into a little room. A fold-up bed and a handful of barren shelves welcomed me. "You'll be sleeping here," he added. "Try to rest. You've got a 12-hour shift starting in under 6. He said, "I'll leave that coat just outside," before disappearing. I lay on the bed, confident that sleep would not come. My mind was racing, contemplating all the nefarious transactions I could be unintentionally involved in. As tiredness took over, I dozed off. "Rise and shine, boy," a voice said. I opened my eyes and saw a man in his 40s standing over me. His long coat reached his calves. His hair was all gray, and a jagged scar ran down one face. This man emitted a different feeling from the vast fellow, harsh and unsmiling. "You're gonna shift it, boy," he hissed. "I need to teach you the ropes before I get my head down. Come on." He jerked a thumb at the door, and I followed without hesitation. Outside, he directed me to a protected generator at the building's back. "This beast is more important than your mama," he remarked sternly. "It powers the lights both indoors and outside. Without it, we're in complete darkness." I joked, except during daylight hours. His expression might have chilled the sun. "Boy," he snapped, "we're in the polar night. The sun has set for the last time in 2 months. It will be dark 24 hours a day for the next 67 days. The large fellow's dirty, fur-lined coat now seemed like a lifeline against the cold. But the reality of 2 months of uninterrupted darkness weighed hard on me. Scar-cheek, as I had begun to refer to him in my imagination, was unconcerned by my rising dread or did not care. He gave me a daily inventory of maintenance jobs to accomplish and cryptically added, "And when the road can be used again..." "What?" I blurted out. Another stare. "We're going nowhere until the sun rises again in January." Scar-cheek left me to start my shift. My demeanor mirrored the bleak surroundings as I labored through the jobs methodically. One of my responsibilities was to check the outdoor lights manually. Stepping outdoors, I was met by their intense light, which illuminated the building's austere exterior and stretched across the snow-covered void. The wind blasted about me, fierce and unforgiving. As I wandered around the perimeter, I noticed a glimmer of activity just beyond the lights. A shadow darted at the verge of view, moving quickly on all fours. I assumed it was a wolf or a bear. I had no notion what type of critters existed in this harsh and frigid environment. I decided they were cruel and not the sort I wanted to have close contact with. I moved to the keypad and quickly entered the code. Back inside, I was finishing up the rest of the list when the huge guy strolled up. I spotted the holster on his belt and pondered why he needed to carry a handgun out there. However, my no-question strategy once again proved successful. He grinned at me and remarked, "Glad to see you doing such a great job." "Sure," I said morosely, "though I wish you had told me I'd be stuck here for months." He grinned again. "You'll make a good wage while you're here," he told you. "And with no avenues of communication with the outside world, no one will bother us." I would have thought that suited you well." "Yeah," I responded. "We're living our dream. The three of us and whatever I saw outside." The smile remained on his face, but his countenance stiffened somewhat. "There's a creature particular to these parts," he informed me. "I have only seen them from afar, but I can tell you they are nasty. They avoid the light and love the gloom. Now that polar night has arrived, they may travel freely through the woods." I did not like the sound of that so much that I dropped my no questions policy. "Are they dangerous?" I inquired. "Not as dangerous as one of these," he said, feeling his holster. "Now that the Arctic night has set in, you should be well prepared. Come with me, and I'll get you geared out." "Thank you," I said gently and uncertainly. After my shift, I trudged back to my sleeping quarters. I passed Scar, who was starting his shift. "You should have warned me about the creatures," I said quietly. A smirk spread over his face. "They won't come near you while the lights are on," he told them. "And if there is a problem, you can simply draw and aim. They are creatures, whereas we are men. We're the alphas. You got that, boy." I scowled at him but did not respond. He laughed to himself and said, "Now, my best friends and I are going to check on the generator." He pushed up the sides of his long coat, like a desperado in an old cowboy film, showing a pair of holsters hooked to his belt. Then he continued on his way. I was just one day into the Arctic night and already annoyed with Scar Cheek. I got an hour of sleep before starting my second shift, feeling like a complete disaster. I began by inspecting the external lights. Each flashed reassuringly as I walked by them, except for the last one, which was flickering. I tried to think what Scar had taught me to do with this happened, but nothing came to mind. He must have run over this when I was wallowing in self-pity and refusing to listen. I touched the light's perspex casing with my knuckle, telling it, "Do not insult me. I am the alpha boy." My tapping succeeded, and the light returned to a steady beam. Laughing at how low I'd slid, I resolved to find the big guy and tell him about it. Perhaps it needs a thorough remedy. As I neared the door to input the security code, the defective light flickered again before going out entirely. The one next to it followed suit. "Damn," I murmured, standing there open-mouthed as the lights died one by one, leaving me in the dark. I was not alone. Something was moving out there, and I knew it was one of the beasts, unless that was my imagination. I forced myself to concentrate. All I needed to do was enter the security code and get inside. Only I couldn't see beyond the tip of my nose. I had to do it by touch. Not a problem, I told myself, and pressed what I believed were the correct keys. Nothing occurred. I swore under my breath and tried again. Still nothing. Then I heard snow crunching underfoot, or under paw. I amended myself, which did not help. I returned to the keyboard, shaking violently now. My fingers felt like they were burning against the cold metal keys as I counted the places. I hit the numerals one by one, concluding with the hash key. There was a click. I twisted the doorknob, and the door opened. I breathed and walked inside, happy to see the light still on. I started running, saying, "The lights have gone off outside." The large fellow emerged first. "Slow down," he advised. "What are you saying about the lights?" "They flickered," I said. "Then they went out. It is all dark." Scar came from his room. "What did you do, boy?" "You idiot," he said. "Nothing," I protested. "They just went off one by one." The large fellow lifted his hands. "Easy," he said. "It'll just be a glitch. Some problem in the system that can be fixed." I nodded, relieved until I recalled. There was something out there, I told him. It was coming toward me. "Ah, yes, the creatures," the vast gentleman replied. "Let us not worry about them. They'll remain outside in the darkness and refuse to enter when the interior lights are turned on. And, of course, Because the doors are closed, they cannot enter. I froze in terror. Did I close the door behind me? I think I left the door open, I mumbled. Scar said, "You heap of worthless junk." Then with lightning speed, he pulled his firearms. "I got this," he said, marching to the door. The large gentleman nodded. "Go with him. Give him back up. I'll be there in a minute." Then he dashed toward his office. I reluctantly followed Scar to the open door. He stood there with both sidearms blazing, shooting into the darkness and enjoying it. "Yeehaw," he said, reloading and firing again. I tried to shield my eyes and asked him to stop, but he wouldn't listen. The large man approached, saying, "That's enough." Scar glared but complied. The large man swung a bright lamp outdoors, showing a terrible scene. Bodies sprawled in the snow, their blood on the ground. The creatures were not wolves, bears, or anything I was familiar with. They were hairless, pallid, and veined, with projecting ribs and shoulder blades. They had paws but no ears or tails. More of them moved just out of reach of the torch beam, their black figures agitated. "You killed them," I said quietly, appalled. "I sure did, boy," Scar answered. "That's what you get for loitering around these parts." Rather than agreeing, the considerable fellow groaned. You shot at my pickup as well. The engine has a hole in it, which will require extensive repairs." He moaned again before closing the door. My shoulders fell with relief. Even if the interior lights failed, the animals were now unable to enter. "Let's go see what the problem is," the vast guy stated, and I was happy to accompany him. The control panel was located on a wall on the far side of the central open area, right before the partitions began. Dozens of switches and dials were installed in the panel. The considerable fellow looked at it for a time and then grimaced. "It's a connection issue," he explained. "Most likely, a cable has come loose." I rushed in with a query full of optimism. "But we can fix it." "We sure can," he said. "Once the connection is back, all you need to do to make the lights come back on is flip this switch here." He put his hand on a red lever in the center of the panel. "It's straightforward." "Great," I responded. "So where's the loose cable?" "Outside," he answered. My intestines squeezed, and my mouth became so dry that I struggled to swallow. "What?" I whispered it so quietly that I doubt either of them heard me. But they were already occupied. Scar Cheek was reloading, and the large man was bringing out 2 more torches and holding them out. I wanted to protest, to say I wasn't going out there, but instead, I took one of the torches. The large guy must have seen my hesitancy. He looked me in the eyes and asked, "Has anyone ever told you you have a negative attitude?" Scar Cheek laughed at this. I had no response and walked behind them as they approached the door that had been safely closed 15 minutes ago. It opened softly. They went out, holding their torches in front of them. I followed. The first thing I did was almost trip over one of the bodies. As the vast gentleman provided directions, I stabilized myself. Walk in circles while aiming your torch ahead. In that manner, the animals will maintain their distance. "Uh-huh," I said, slowly whirling in a circle. The beam of my torch revealed more of the monsters. They flinched and moved too swiftly for me to see anything except a pallid limb. I continued circling and moving ahead. The light held them at bay. The ray briefly lit a mouthful of bared teeth before the thing vanished into the darkness. Our journey was tortuously slow, but we soon arrived at the cluster of wires and equipment with the generator at its center. "You two give me cover," the large man remarked. Scar Cheek and I erected crisscrossing light barriers as he began to work. After about 5 minutes, he groaned. "I think that's fixed it," he remarked. "Now, let's get back inside." We fled towards a door. "Not far now," I murmured before stumbling. I fell on a body. My torch struck the ground. its beam pointing uselessly upward. The other's lasers blinded me while they cursed. "I'm sorry," I said. "I'm sorry." The corpse underneath me was still warm, with firm skin wherever my hands touched it. As I fought to lift myself, I felt a tug on my leg. A close-range, booming gunfire rang out. I flinched, but was able to grasp my torch and swing it at my leg. There, I saw the body of a beast, its head ripped open and its face covered in blood. It twitched, then fell motionless. The large guy dragged me to my feet with one hand, while holding the firearm that had rescued me. Scarred Cheek waved his flame in quick circles to keep the beast at bay. "Get back to back," the vast gentleman instructed. We rotate together. I did as I was instructed. We proceeded to approach the door one step at a time. The large man entered the code and the door opened, displaying the light within. I followed him inside, but Scar Cheek lingered. "What are you doing?" the large man growled. "One more for luck," Scar Cheek said. He opened fire, and one of the black figures collapsed. He smiled as he lowered his torch and approached the door. Then his body tightened. His eyes widened and he slumped forward. A bleeding gash stretched along his spine. I saw razor-sharp claws topped with blood before the monster scuttled away. "We have to help him," I yelled and lurched toward Scar Cheek. "Leave him, you fool," the considerable gentleman yelled. "He died. We need to close the door. We can't just leave him." I yelled back. "No!" the considerable guy yelled. I withdrew as the inside lights flickered and failed. "It's dark," I said. "You did not solve it. You made things worse." "Go to hell," the considerable gentleman yelled back. As animals began to enter, he attempted to seal the door. I aimed my flashlight upwards. The beasts pounced on him, their claws slicing. Blood spurted. My torchlight forced him to flee, and I dashed to the large fellow. He staggered, gripping his wounds and bleeding through his fingers. "The switch," I said. "Will it still work?" He attempted to speak, but blood gushed into his mouth. His legs buckled and he collapsed. I stood, shaking, and forced myself to keep the flame steady. The animals closed in. I turned and bolted, the beam of my torch jerking over the floor. I approached the control panel and pushed the lever. The lights flickered before bursting into life. The animals froze, their crimson eyes exposed to the bright light. They escaped one by one. I waited until the last one was gone before stepping outdoors. The external lights were operating again, and the animals were gone. That happened 2 weeks ago. It's December 2nd, and Polar Night will finish on January 23rd. There are 51 days remaining in the darkness.